Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained podcast. Conflict in our world today is deep, complex, and hybrid. For the last few years, relations between the United States and China have been slowly declining, and these hybrid methods of conflict are gaining traction as topics that are worthy of discussion. A direct clash between China and the United States is unlikely today, especially one initiated by the Chinese. Because China possesses long-term structural advantages and typically pursues a strategy of patience, instigating conventional war would damage them. Because of this, they are unlikely to instigate conventional war in the near term, but if relations continue to decline between the world's two superpowers, hybrid methods will likely be pursued more than they are today. Another vital aspect here is that the United States is showing many characteristics of a slowly declining empire. It will hence want to defend its position at the top of the world order that it holds today. It's important to consider what this potential strategy of defence could look like. Would it remain defensive in nature, or would the best form of defence actually be attack? Today, I'll explore how the two nations interact and how this could change in the future through scenario analysis. I'll start by discussing Chinese scenarios. In the near-term future, China will likely maintain its strategy of patience. China bides its time, and its innovation sees it naturally expand as a naval and military power in the Indo-Pacific. They will continue to chip away slowly at the United States through hybrid war measures, preferring to stick to the more secretive forms of hybrid conflict, such as cyber warfare. Moving further into the future, these hybrid strategies will likely remain ingrained. China will dominate economically and in trade, creating constant tensions between their own structural advantages and the decline of the United States. The British Empire in the 17th to the 19th century saw naval power and control of trade routes grow, and this allowed it to project power globally. China is attempting to do this through a slightly different method, typically through BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative, which is mainly focused over land-based trade. But at the same time as doing this, China is expanding its military strength. This ensures that hybrid strategies will remain ingrained in China's long-term strategies. Eventually, in the future, China will break out. China will continue to establish naval expansion via naval operations and artificial islands, and its influence and control of maritime territory will reach further out of the first island chain. China is currently expanding its influence in the Pacific today by pressuring island nations to drop diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and it's working. This would see China grow in soft power, while its expansion and the Belt and Road Initiative would see China grow in connective trade power in this new regionalised world. However, China's strategy of breakout isn't without its disadvantages. This could lead to greater distaste from geopolitical actors in the region who have issues with China's territorial ambitions. This is nations such as Vietnam and the Philippines. The United States could be vital partners for these nations if relations soured between the Chinese and its nearby neighbours. When it comes to potential scenarios for China moving forward, because of its structural advantages and its typical strategy of pursuing patience, I don't believe the Chinese will aggress against any other nation because, as I said in the introduction, this would hurt them more than it would benefit them. As a result, my scenario analysis on China is relatively thin when compared to that of the United States. Currently today, the United States pursues a strategy of cold containment when it comes to China. They attempt to keep China inside the first island chain, and freedom of navigation of the global oceans helps the United States to feel like they are doing a successful job at containing China. But in coming decades, this could be a strategy that backfires. If China advances militarily, especially in the maritime realm, it too could benefit from global freedom of navigation. During this strategy of cold containment, the United States also continues to pursue other hybrid conflict strategies, such as trade warfare and financial warfare. A huge part of this cold containment strategy is also the United States' regional allies, such as Japan and South Korea. What's important to note is that during this scenario of cold containment, a direct hot conflict between the United States and the Chinese would not occur. However, if we look towards the long-term future, this strategy of cold containment could turn into one of hot containment. The United States seeks to push its current military advantage, seeking to actively constrain China's expansion of influence. Since this could threaten the United States' ability to freely navigate in the Indo-Pacific, hotspots of rising tension could begin to emerge. This was seen in the Cold War, where the Truman Doctrine, NATO, and forward military deployments sought to pressure the Soviets. And then we had the Cuban Missile Crisis that brought us close to the brink. Deployments of US military assets to Japan, South Korea, and the Second Island Chain occur today, but expansions of these deployments could be the beginning of such a strategy. Alternatively, we could see closer US-Filipino relations, weapons packages sent to Taiwan, or support for nations in the Indo-Pacific who hold territorial disputes with the Chinese in the South China Sea. If this scenario did unfold, this would likely see geopolitical hybrid conflict grow more visible on a global stage. It's notable a similar scenario unfolded in the 1930s and the 1940s, when the United States was growing to become the world's ruling power, and Japan was the rising power. The United States enacted trade and resource restrictions on Japan, and Japan was eventually squeezed so much that it had to take action, and they did this with the attack on Pearl Harbor. This is why the concept of leverage that I've been discussing for many weeks is vital in this US-China relationship. The biggest question is, would China find itself in the same boat as the Japanese, where they would be forced to take action, or would they be immune to such aggression and weaponization by the United States because of China's deep control of global supply chains? This scenario, if it was to occur, would of course occur in the long-term future, because if it happened today, both nations could hurt the other. But this scenario is worth considering in a world where US-China relations continue to decline. Alternatively, there are some other strategies that are directly linked to the methods of hybrid strategy that the United States pursues against the Chinese. We could see a technological arms race unfold between the two, with cyber, artificial intelligence, and quantum advancing as key technological industries for the future. The United States possesses clear advantages in high-end semiconductors. A technological decoupling between the two superpowers would see two systems clashing with one another. Such a decoupling would likely damage innovation on a global scale due to the spread and complexity of the semiconductor supply chain today. With China seeking to advance innovation, and with China typically innovating at a quicker pace than the United States does, this could hinder them. We have also seen early signs of such a potential technological decoupling, with reduced academic exchange between the two nations and limitations on some technological exports. In response, China could pursue one area of hybrid conflict where it is known to be quite successful, and that is cyber warfare. In the worst case scenario, cyber warfare could cause satellite disruption that would cripple travel, intelligence, and logistics. Infrastructure cyber attacks could also lead to blackouts and fuel shortages, which are parts of the world today that we take for granted. If such an escalation would occur, cyber warfare would grow to become a more visible part of hybrid war. The next scenario I want to explore is the United States, and if it has to play its card that it wants to play, or if it will lose the chance to. What I mean by this is that the United States is the defending superpower against the rising Chinese. Could the United States be forced to make a move to challenge China's structural advantages? This could come in any form of hybrid conflict, but most notably, it would see a dramatic decline in US-China relations. For the United States, they would choose an area of hybrid conflict where they have advantages. Today, that could be in semiconductors, but China could hurt them back with rare earth restrictions, for example. The United States could also hurt China today, especially in the finance realm, but again, this comes back to the important concept of leverage, and that as both the United States and China seek to pursue resiliency from the other, they won't make aggressive moves today because they can both hurt each other. So this is a scenario to ponder, but because both nations lack resiliency against the other, it won't happen today. Another potential scenario is one that wouldn't involve the relations between the United States and China, but one that could occur unilaterally. Both nations could suffer an internal crisis. For China, this could be demographic issues. The one-child policy, despite concluding in 2016, has created a huge bulge at the top of China's population pyramid. And in reality, this can often see one working child potentially supporting 2 parents and 4 grandparents. For the United States, their internal crisis could be economic or political in scope. Speaking of economic conflict, what if the United States attempted to enact such conflict on China, but rather than this isolating China, it actually isolated the United States? China is attempting to model its rising financial system as one that is fair, and this could appeal to neutral geopolitical actors better than the current dollar system. The United States has demonstrated that it is willing to weaponize this system when it froze Russian reserves at the start of the Ukraine war, and this led many nations to attempt to diversify away from the dollar, because why would they risk this happening to them? This is why Trump is currently pursuing the Mar-a-Lago Accord. He's using tariffs to attempt to bring nations to negotiate with the United States so that they can walk in step with them by holding onto US debt and by raising the value of their domestic currencies relative to the dollar so that exports out of the United States are incentivized. But some nations are already standing up to this aggression, as seen with Canada's recent Reagan tariff advert. Over time, if this trend continues, the United States could see more nations standing firm under pressure. But this is where leverage, once again, is important. Some nations need the United States and will have to make deals with them, but others are seeking distance. With China's large control over global supply chains and with its rapid innovation, China could benefit if a large number of geopolitical actors start distancing from the United States. A final scenario that I want to discuss is more poles arising. What I mean by this is when discussing a multipolar world, some geopolitical analysts disagree with its potential rise, instead seeing a bipolar world order emerging that will involve China and the United States. However, what if Japan seeks to rise to challenge China in the Pacific itself? What if India continues to grow and it emerges as a third pole? What if Russia and China relations decline? The Middle East could continue to gain soft diplomatic power, or Southeast Asia could emerge as a massive manufacturing hub to rival China. We could even see Europe finally get its act together. Now, these exact scenarios might not unfold, but it highlights that geopolitical actors are incentivized to act in their own self-interest. In the long-term future, for many of these geopolitical actors, self-interest could see them pursue strategies outside of a Chinese-led or US-led system. Now, this isn't necessarily a huge issue in bilateral US-China relations, but these independent variables will shape the potential outcome, and it makes analysing the US-China relationship all the more confusing. Now, these scenarios are quite negative and pessimistic in scope. Next episode, I will explore scenarios of cooperation that could potentially occur. To finish, in considering scenarios such as this, I hope it's clear that my aim isn't to predict the future. I'm aware that this is impossible, especially with the sheer number of geopolitical actors and decisions that these actors make that drive changes in our geopolitical world. The future will likely be very different from what we foresee today, but I hope episodes such as this will highlight some of the potential forces that could be key drivers in the emerging world of tomorrow. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this episode, why not leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice? I've been Dylan, and I'll talk to you next time.